It all started during the early days of our marriage when Amanda and I were still figuring out how to live together. We were two young people trying to juggle love and the everyday grind of life. Those first years brought their share of small wins, buying our first home, raising two energetic boys, and settling into a suburban routine. But as time passed, cracks started to appear in what seemed like a perfect life. Amanda was always the one chasing adventure, pushing boundaries, while I preferred the comfort of routine. As our differences grew, we began to drift apart. I threw myself into work and fatherhood, while Amanda sought excitement elsewhere, pulling further away from the life we had built. One lazy Sunday, I found myself wandering around Home Depot, just killing time. Part of me knew I should be at church, but browsing tools felt like a better way to spend the day. I didn't have any pressing needs, but it sure seemed more productive than playing golf. As I roamed the aisles, I bumped into Andrew Wheeler, a family friend. We weren't especially close, but we could always have a decent conversation over coffee. It just so happened that his wife, Laura, and my wife, Amanda, were leaving the next day for a week-long Caribbean cruise. Since Andrew couldn't take time off work, Amanda insisted I stay home with the kids, while she and Laura enjoyed their vacation. She argued that I'd just be a third wheel and that it would save them money if they shared a cabin. I wasn't thrilled, but I didn't want to argue about it. You can probably guess where this is headed. Andrew and I ended up standing in the pest control aisle. "Sorry you couldn't join the cruise," Andrew said, sounding genuinely disappointed. But, considering he couldn't get time off work, what was he expecting? "I've already taken the week off. I'm going to use the time to paint the kitchen while they're away," I replied. "Amanda told me you couldn't get the time off." "I work for my dad, Andrew. I can leave whenever I want." "I was ready to go when Laura told me you couldn't make it," I explained. We stood in awkward silence until an elderly man on a motorized cart grumbled at us to move. "Want to grab some coffee?" I suggested. "Sure," Andrew agreed. We spent the next couple of hours at McDonald's, slowly realizing that our wives had planned this cruise without us. The big question was, why? We both danced around the obvious until we couldn't anymore. Finally, I broke the silence. "So, Andrew, are they bringing along two guys? Or are they planning to meet strangers?" I asked, my voice tinged with suspicion. Andrew hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Want a Danish?" he offered, trying to change the subject. He wasn't avoiding the question, just stalling for time. We grabbed some fresh buns and more coffee. "I can't imagine Laura hooking up with a stranger, so it must be someone they've arranged to meet," Andrew mused. "I hate to admit it, but I think you're right. Why would they go on a trip like this? Wouldn't it be easier to find someone local?" I replied, still trying to process it all. I've always trusted Amanda and never thought she'd be involved with someone else. But why would two mothers with school-age kids even consider this? We sat in silence, sipping our coffee and staring out the window. "Peter, it's probably a couple of guys from work. Amanda and Laura both work at International Casualty Insurance," Andrew suggested. His explanation made sense. "Is there anything we can do to stop this? If they're comfortable enough to go on a cruise with these guys, we might already be too late," I asked. "You think they've already been unfaithful?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I hate to say it, but I'm starting to think so," Andrew admitted. He got up, irritated, after paying 27 cents for a glass of ice. We added ice to our scalding coffee and sat quietly. "Now that I think about it, Laura's been working late a lot lately, nights and weekends. I never really thought much about it, but now I see what you mean," Andrew said, as though the pieces were falling into place. "I won't stop Amanda from going, but I'm not just going to sit here and do nothing either," I said. I finished my Danish and tossed the last of my coffee in the trash. "Andrew, let's meet here tomorrow, right after the girls leave for the airport. We've got some planning to do. Don't mention anything to Laura that might tip her off." Andrew gave me a thumbs up as I stood to leave. He looked like he was staying to finish his coffee, but his expression wasn't exactly happy. When I got home, everything seemed normal. Our two sons, Ethan, 9, and Lucas, 10, were glued to the TV. I thought they should be outside, but I had long given up on that battle. Amanda was acting like her usual self. I sat down with the newspaper while she made a late lunch. I thought she might bring up the trip, but she avoided the subject altogether. Naturally, that raised some suspicions. After lunch, I took the boys outside to kick around a soccer ball while Amanda stayed inside, packing. She was determined to get everything ready so she could leave without a hitch in the morning. I glanced back at the house occasionally. How had I missed all of this? How blind had I been? Why didn't I see it sooner? Ethan, Lucas, I'm going to be painting the house next week while your mom's away. How about you spend the week with Grandma and Grandpa Frank? I didn't wait for an answer. Both of them bolted for the house, and in less than 10 minutes, they were packed. My parents lived on a farm 20 miles out of town and had horses. It wasn't exactly a hard sell. Amanda grumbled a bit but didn't put up much of a fight. When I got back, dinner was already on the table. After freshening up, Amanda went to take a shower. That gave me the perfect opportunity to quickly check her bags. My suspicions were confirmed when I noticed 3 things. First, most of her sleepwear seemed out of place, especially if she was just going with Laura. The second red flag was a new orange bikini hidden in her makeup bag. But the most troubling discovery was the 2 10-packs of condoms tucked away in a case. I couldn't help but wonder, why would my wife need condoms on a cruise? I couldn't believe I was even thinking these thoughts. Amanda had mentioned wanting to get a good night's sleep before the trip, while I had planned to spend the evening binge-watching Steven Seagal movies. Unfortunately, I didn't have international coverage on my cell phone, unlike Amanda, who had a work phone with all the perks. Although I couldn't call her, she promised to check in daily or whenever something important came up. I reassured her not to worry, explaining that if I didn't answer, I might be at my parents' house with the boys or busy painting. My words seemed to put her at ease. When I dropped Amanda off at the terminal, Laura was already there, smiling and waving at me as Amanda joined her. I couldn't help but look forward to catching up with Andrew. After I parked, Andrew approached with a couple of cups of coffee, complaining about the ice. "Peter, please tell me you have some good news," Andrew pleaded. I could only shake my head.
No.
Laura packed 2 new dresses and some lingerie that most women would find embarrassing. Worse, I found a new bikini and a bunch of condoms. I didn't even think to check her makeup bag. I'm not sure if I should feel relieved that I didn't find more, or regret not searching harder. Andrew and I spent the next 20 minutes talking about our situation. Once our coffee was gone, it was time to shift gears. Our first stop was International Casualty Insurance, where we told the receptionist we needed to speak with Robert Harris, the head of human resources. Andrew and I had known Robert since high school. While we weren't close, we got along fine. "Oh no," Robert said, looking less than thrilled to see us. "Can you close the door?" I asked. Andrew and I settled into a couple of uncomfortable chairs across from him. "Do you know why we're here, Robert?" I asked. "I have a pretty good idea," he answered, clearly unhappy. Andrew and I exchanged a quick smile, but Robert remained serious. "We were hoping you could give us the list of employees on vacation this week," I said. "Is that a question?" Robert responded, his tone now more serious. Our smiles faded. Robert didn't say much else as he typed on his computer. He sighed and mentioned Amanda and Laura. 14 employees are on vacation this week," he said. "Can you print us a list?" Andrew asked. "No, but I can give you the info you need," Robert replied. He typed a few more commands, and the printer next to him came to life, spitting out 2 sheets of paper. He watched us closely as we looked them over. The pages contained details about Marcus Jennings and Timothy Richards. Andrew and I skimmed the information before looking back at Robert. These 2 were on the same cruise as Amanda and Laura. "We don't need to see the rest of the list," I said. "Was that what you were asking?" Robert asked. "Out of curiosity, do you know who was paired with whom?" Andrew asked. Robert placed a photo of Timothy in front of me and another in front of Andrew. He seemed hesitant to say more. "Does anyone else know about this?" I pressed. Robert paused before admitting, "Everyone knows. I thought there was a policy against this kind of thing," I said, trying to hold my composure. "There is, but it only kicks in if there's a formal complaint," Robert explained. "And then what happens?" Andrew asked, leaning in. Usually just a warning, Robert said. And if we push for more? Andrew pressed. You're not planning to make this difficult for me, are you? Robert asked, sounding genuinely concerned. Andrew and I exchanged a look. No words were needed, our intentions were clear. Robert, if those four are still working here next week, we'll be taking legal action. We don't have all the details yet, but it's inevitable. We'll have our attorney contact you or your legal department, whichever you prefer, Andrew said firmly. Robert seemed to scramble for words. Any inquiries will be handled in accordance with the situation. We didn't take action earlier because the relationship was consensual. No one was coerced. While we're not clear on the full extent, we know it exists. But there wasn't a complaint until now, Robert added, attempting to justify himself. Yes, Robert, here's the deal. You fire all four of them and we'll drop the legal threat. If nothing happens, though, expect a lawsuit, and it'll be very public, I said, laying out our terms. Andrew and I stood our ground. After shaking hands with Robert, we walked out through the front doors. As we made our way to the parking lot, Andrew glanced at me. So, what's our next move? He asked. I think we should see the lawyer first. After that, we can grab lunch and then head to the local travel agency, I suggested. When we parked outside the lawyer's office, Andrew suddenly stopped. I looked at him, confused. What's up? I asked. Peter, what exactly are we going to ask the lawyer to do for us? He asked, a look of concern on his face. What do you mean? I replied, still not following. Well, I'm thinking that once we walk through that door, it's going to cost us a lot of money, and all we'll get is a lighter wallet. Sure, we'll get divorced and be free of those cheating women, but think about it. We'll be stuck with alimony, mortgage payments, losing custody of the kids, and paying child support. All the bills will fall on us, and the court will probably make us keep them on credit cards and cell phones. By the time it's over, we'll also be paying for our kids' college. And for what? We won't get anything out of it. Why would anyone in their right mind want a divorce? The only reason I can think of is to stay connected with the kids. That's the real trade-off. Damn it, Andrew. I love my kids. I don't want to lose them. I get it. I'd be devastated if I couldn't see my daughters again. But I don't want to be financially ruined just because my wife was unfaithful. After everything that's happened, the fair thing would be for us to get custody and hold them accountable. But that seems unlikely, Andrew said, his frustration mirroring my own. It feels like we're being backed into a corner, I muttered, feeling trapped. We both stood there in silence, contemplating our next steps. Peter, who in the world came up with these ridiculous laws? It's just not right, Andrew added, clearly upset. We both turned and walked back to our cars. Andrew, I'll admit it. Amanda's a great mom. If I had to raise the kids on my own, I don't think I could do as well as she does. I get it. Same here. Laura's an amazing mom, and the girls adore her. It kills me to say it, but she's a better parent than I could ever be. Even after everything that's happened, Andrew confessed. We both fell silent again. I leaned against my car, absent-mindedly kicking at the gravel, while Andrew fiddled with the zipper on his jacket. Peter, how about we grab some ribs? Andrew suggested. We shared a full rack, washed it down with 3 beers each, then switched to coffee and indulged in some banana pudding. After we sobered up enough to drive, we made our way to Good Times Travel Agency. Susan Raburn, an old family friend turned former friend, ran the agency. Everyone in our circle had relied on Susan for their travel plans. Her loyalty was the only thing keeping her afloat as the internet wiped out most of her competition. As we walked in, it was clear from the look on her face that she knew exactly why we were there. Andrew and I sat down, exchanging a knowing grin as we faced the cause of our troubles. The other 2 agents excused themselves for lunch, one of them leaving behind a brown paper bag on his desk. It was obvious that everyone in the office knew what was going on and was trying to distance themselves. We sat in silence, not saying a word. Susan smiled awkwardly, trying to get comfortable in her chair but failing. Finally, she couldn't hold back any longer. "How can I help you gentlemen today?" Susan asked, her voice shaky. Andrew and I exchanged a look and let out a loud laugh, loud enough for Susan to hear. I leaned in, speaking quietly. "You have 5 minutes to spill. Tell me everything," I insisted, my voice cold. "Or I'll cause such a scene that the police will have no choice but to treat this place like a crime scene." Susan shifted in her seat, trying to maintain control. "Come on, guys. Cut me some slack. I'm not going to tell you anything more than what your wives have already told you. You wouldn't do anything rash, right?" Andrew stood up and turned toward the office entrance, where 2 other agents and a couple planning their vacation stood waiting. "All right, listen up," Andrew said, his voice firm. "I suggest you all step outside for a moment. We're about to rearrange the furniture in here." "Peter, Andrew, please." "Wait, what do you want? Just don't make a mess or cause trouble for me or the office." "I don't need any more problems," Susan said, her voice full of desperation. "Good times," Andrew muttered under his breath. This agency was a franchise, and Susan had been dealing with some serious issues in the past year. She wasn't eager to bring any more attention to herself. Andrew gestured for the others to relax and sit back down. "Susan, who else is with Amanda and Laura?" I asked bluntly, not wasting time. "Peter, there are over 1,000 people on that ship," Susan replied, her voice wavering as she tried to avoid answering directly. "You know exactly what I mean," I pressed, my patience running thin. "Susan, I'm asking you, who else from International Casualty is on that ship?" I demanded, my voice firm and relentless. "I can't tell you that," she answered quickly, her tone much firmer this time, but I could hear the uncertainty underneath. "Susan, what rooms are Amanda and Laura in?" Andrew asked, his voice calm but unwavering. "They're booked in room 113 on the sunset deck," she said, her voice a little unsteady now. "That's not what I asked you, is it?" I shot back, my frustration bubbling over. "Damn it, Peter. What are you trying to do? What do you expect from me?" Susan snapped, clearly growing agitated. "Which rooms are Timothy Richards and Marcus Manu in?" I demanded, slamming my fist on the desk for emphasis. Susan hesitated, her face betraying a flicker of fear. "Richards and Manu are in room 115 on the sunset deck," she murmured, her voice barely audible. Andrew leaned forward, locking eyes with her. "Susan, Timothy is sharing a room with my wife Laura," he said, his tone cold and emotionless. Susan recoiled slightly, trying to pull away from the table. "Laura and Timothy are in room 113, and Amanda and Marcus are in room 115. But I didn't arrange this. Someone else did. I just followed instructions," she admitted, her voice shaking as the words tumbled out. Realizing she had said too much, Susan abruptly fell silent and handed us the documents we had requested. Her hands trembled slightly, and though she wasn't crying, it was clear that she was on the verge of breaking down. As we prepared to leave, I turned to her and made it clear, "Don't contact anyone, on the ship or anyone back home, about this visit or anything we've discussed here today. If you do, there will be severe consequences for your business." As we walked out of the office, Andrew seemed unsure about our next move. I admitted that I didn't have a detailed plan, but it felt like we were doing what needed to be done. Andrew decided to leave his daughters Emily and Jessica with his sister Carla, who also had 2 teenage girls. Once things settled, he would meet me at my house. That evening, we pored over brochures and schedules, which helped us piece together a plan. Both of us knew that our marriages were irreparable, and we turned our focus to our children's well-being. We loved them deeply and considered how the divorce would affect their lives and our responsibilities. We both agreed that we wouldn't rush into formal divorce proceedings. Instead, we'd each figure out how best to care for our kids, making sure they were our priority. I hoped that after everything calmed down, I could find a way to stay with Amanda and the kids, providing for their needs without financially supporting her. This would require a lot of planning. If things went according to plan, I also intended to help with their college expenses. But for now, we had to address the immediate concerns. Luckily, the cruise ship offered free Wi-Fi. Andrew planned to bring his laptop along and download contact information for friends, family, and colleagues. Everything from addresses to phone numbers and email addresses. Cell phone issues would be trickier, but we decided to deal with those later. The ship was scheduled to dock in Montego Bay on Wednesday morning, and we found an affordable sightseeing flight that would get us there by 7 a.m. that day. Booking a room for the entire duration of the cruise was surprisingly easy, and within an hour we had flights to Jamaica and a return reservation all set. Amanda left a message saying that they'd settled into their cabin with no issues and were already at sea. She mentioned that Laura was also on board, just as expected. The evening was just beginning, and we were almost ready to go. We planned to spend the next day organizing our financial and personal matters, things like bank accounts, bills, credit cards, and belongings. I intended to move all my things to my parents' house for safekeeping, while Andrew's brother would take care of his things. Fortunately, a work colleague let us park our cars at his place and offered to drive us to the airport. Although leaving at midnight wasn't ideal, it was necessary. The airport was a short taxi ride from the cruise ship parking lot. We watched the sun set behind the market stalls, the colors fading into twilight. We only had 2 carry-on bags and Andrew's laptop, nothing extravagant, just the essentials. About 10 minutes later, passengers began disembarking from the ship. Some made their way toward the town center, while most headed to the waiting tour buses in an orderly fashion. Everything seemed smooth and well-coordinated, as if this was a regular routine. Amanda and Laura came down the walkway, both of them grinning ear to ear. The 2 men walking behind them were just as cheerful, holding hands with our wives. It was obvious these were Marcus and Timothy. They were good-looking, maybe a few years younger than Andrew and me, but not the rough-and-tumble types you might have expected. We watched from a distance, seated on small stools, as they all boarded the bus to Dunn's River Falls. Andrew waved at the ticket collector, exchanged a few words with the driver, and then came over to us. Jamaicans are known for their bargaining skills, and it took about 5 minutes and $200 to get the driver to agree to help us out. Identifying Amanda and Laura for the driver was easy, and he was more than happy to take as many photos as we wanted of the 2 couples at the falls. When we asked for a few more daring pictures, he grinned and gave us a thumbs up. The bus was supposed to return at 3 p.m., and we assured him we'd be there, ready with the agreed payment. He smiled again, proudly emphasizing the quality of his camera, and winked. We quickly realized he was expecting an extra $200, far more than what his $40 camera was worth. Once the buses left, we headed to settle into our room. For an additional $100, the clerk at the front desk registered us under the names Bob Jones and James Moore. If all went well, we'd remain incognito for the rest of the cruise. We grabbed some sandwiches and spent the afternoon familiarizing ourselves with the ship's layout. In no time, we had memorized the stairs, elevators, and passageways. We decided to avoid the dining room and the showroom to reduce the chances of running into Amanda or Laura. Andrew set up his laptop, ran a few tests, and we were pleased to find no issues with internet access or email. We briefly considered breaking into our wives' rooms, but quickly discarded the idea. As we sat comfortably in the same booth as before, the buses started returning. The one from Dunn's River Falls was right on time. Andrew and I were sipping Red Label when Amanda, Laura, and their companions walked past us. The straw hats we wore probably helped us blend in, keeping our identities concealed. Our ticket collector came over, grinning from ear to ear, clearly proud of his work. His smile was so wide, you could tell he was eager to show us what he had captured. "You guys are going to love these," he said, boasting about his shots. Before he could go on, Andrew handed him a cold beer. We quickly skimmed through the photos. There were more intimate embraces and kisses than we had anticipated. I handed over $200, then gave another for the driver. After waiting a few more minutes to ensure our wives had cleared the boarding area, we made our way back to our cabin. The evening ahead was going to be busy, but we needed to figure out how to have dinner discreetly first. The cabin had a balcony that gave us a clear view of the main dining room entrance. We settled into comfortable chairs, keeping an eye on the passengers who were beginning to line up for dinner. We speculated that our wives would probably opt for an earlier dinner, making room for later activities like dancing and entertainment. It didn't take long before they showed up and joined the line. The couples walked side by side, hand in hand, looking like they were married. Andrew gave me a puzzled glance as I stood up to make a quick call from the service phone. I returned to the seat with a wide grin on my face within 30 seconds. Just as the couples were about to be seated, an announcement rang through the dining area. Attention, Andrew Wheeler. Please join your party on the Leo deck. Andrew Wheeler. The announcement wasn't loud, but it was clear enough for everyone around to hear. Laura immediately turned her head as if a speaker had been right in front of her. She stepped aside to let the next group of diners pass. Meanwhile, Amanda and Laura started an animated conversation while Marcus and Timothy stood to the side, patiently waiting. Suddenly, Laura pulled out her phone and dialed a number from her speed dial. After about 30 seconds, she shook her head, signaling that no one had picked up. Amanda made her own call, but when hers went unanswered too, both women looked concerned and made their way into the dining room. "Peter, that was brilliant," Andrew said with a chuckle. "I'd love to know what they were talking about during that meal, even if it did seem a bit childish." We both laughed quickly and then headed up to the sunset deck for tacos and margaritas. An hour later, we returned to our cabin, ready to get to work. Today was critical, especially since we would be arriving in Cancun the following morning. Neither of our homes had responded to our calls, and no one knew where we were. Even if our parents or Andrew's brother had tried to reach us, they would have been completely in the dark. We uploaded all the photos from Dunn's River Falls onto the laptop. Some pictures had all four of them together, while most focused on the couples. A few were more intimate, showing Amanda in her new orange bikini, which had caused a bit of a wardrobe malfunction on the way to the falls, making her giggle. Though a video would have been better, we had to make do. Andrew put together a collage of the best dozen shots, with Marcus and Timothy featured in every single one. We each picked our favorite photo, and Andrew included it in an e-card with the message, "Having a great time. Wish you were here." By 9 p.m. we had sent out over 200 emails. I was surprised by how many friends, family members, and social contacts we had between us. Naturally, everyone from International Casualty received their own set of photos. The sky deck was nearly empty and the wind was picking up. Andrew and I found a quiet corner, enjoying 3 long-necked beers to celebrate our successful first day. We didn't know what we'd do the next day, but since the e-card trick had worked so well, we decided to use it again. We turned in early, ready for what lay ahead. The ship had a great breakfast selection: fruit, Danish pastries, and coffee. We avoided the crowded dining rooms and used service stairways instead of elevators. Andrew and I grabbed refreshing rum drinks with pineapple on the sun deck, located at the back of the ship. From there, we had a great view of the main pool, which was starting to get busier. As we enjoyed our second round of drinks, Amanda and Laura appeared, settling into a couple of chairs nearby, but Marcus and Timothy were nowhere to be seen. Unsure of what to do next, we just watched for a while. At the other end of the deck, a bored-looking teenager was glued to his cell phone. I always found it interesting how quickly teenagers could text on those things. I nudged Andrew, and together we approached the kid. It was a bit awkward, trying to approach a boy on a cruise ship without looking suspicious, but we made it work. Eventually, he agreed to let us use his phone for $20. "Hello? Hi, Amanda, it's Peter. Sorry I missed your call last night. I tried calling home 3 times. I began. "Peter, your call is showing as coming from Baltimore." Amanda responded, sounding confused. "Sorry, I had to borrow this phone. You know I can't make calls from mine. Is everything okay? Your parents didn't know where you were?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "I'm fine, just busy. Are you having a good time?" she asked, her tone lightening a bit. "Yeah, we're having a great time. It's too bad you couldn't join us," she replied. "All right, say hi to Laura for me. By the way, you look amazing in that orange bikini. I don't remember seeing it before," I added, testing her reaction. "What?" Amanda's voice was full of surprise. Andrew and I couldn't help but burst into laughter as I ended the call and handed the phone back to the teenager. We decided to block Amanda and Laura's numbers on their phones right after. I gave the kid another $20 and reminded him to keep what had just happened a secret. He thought it was cool and immediately agreed. Amanda and Laura started searching the ship for me. Amanda tried to hide behind a large towel, as if that would keep her unnoticed. It was a pretty silly attempt. She dialed the number we had used twice but eventually gave up. Marcus and Timothy showed up shortly after. Andrew made a beeline for the service phone on the sun deck. A few minutes later he came back, grinning from ear to ear. "Attention, Andrew Wheeler. Please join your group at the shuffleboard court. Andrew Wheeler, please join your group at the shuffleboard court." As soon as the announcement echoed through the ship, a flurry of movement broke out near the pool. Laura and Amanda quickly gathered their things and made their way to the shuffleboard court on the port side of the yacht, while Marcus and Timothy stood idly by, clearly annoyed. From our vantage point above, we watched as our wives waited for nearly half an hour before they turned around and headed back. As they walked back toward their rooms, Amanda pulled out her phone and dialed a number. The look on her face told us everything. We knew the postcards had finally reached home. We didn't need to hear who she was talking to. It didn't matter anymore. The people in our lives now had photos of Amanda and Laura with their new boyfriends. They lingered on the deck for a few moments, looking at the display on Amanda's phone, before making their way to the cabin deck. Marcus and Timothy had dinner that evening without their female companions and spent the rest of the night drinking at the cabaret bar on the lagoon deck. Andrew and I tucked ourselves into a quiet corner, enjoying pizza and beer, and they never noticed us. We debated moving closer to listen in on their conversation but ultimately decided against it. Our wives didn't show up, and around midnight, both men staggered out of the bar, clearly drunk, with several crew members helping them back to their cabins. We never found out how they spent the night, but at that point it didn't matter. The next morning, we were on the sun deck, sipping coffee and nibbling on fresh fruit as the Diamond Sunset docked in Cancun. Most of the passengers had gathered on the promenade deck, eager to begin their day. We still hadn't made solid plans for the day, unsure if following the two couples ashore was the right move. But that decision became irrelevant when Amanda and Laura were among the first to disembark, luggage in hand. They weren't heading out for a day trip, they were leaving the cruise entirely. While the rest of the tourists piled onto buses for excursions, Amanda and Laura hailed a cab and sped off. Andrew and I exchanged a look, taken aback by this unexpected turn of events. We had assumed our wives would try to find us, given how small the boat was, but they made no attempt. Marcus and Timothy also left the ship, boarding a tour bus, leaving us uncertain of their next move. We spent a quiet, leisurely lunch in the dining room, which was nearly empty. With one more stop before returning to Grand Cayman, we realized we needed to adjust our strategy. Another relaxed lunch in the dining room could be in order later. Despite most of the passengers being ashore, Amanda and Laura's sudden departure didn't affect the laid-back atmosphere. It only made the environment feel more relaxed and enjoyable. The ship was set to leave Cancun that evening, bound for the Cayman Islands the next afternoon. It seemed like the perfect moment for a serious conversation. We knew talking to Marcus and Timothy was necessary, but Andrew and I weren't sure what approach to take. As we entered the formal dining room, we noticed that our wives and their companions had secured a table for 4 with 2 empty seats. Andrew and I waited until Marcus and Timothy sat down before we made our move, sliding into the vacant seats. No one questioned our presence. "Good evening, gentlemen. I trust you know who we are." I began, my tone even. Timothy gave a slight nod, while Marcus's face twisted into a look of annoyance. Timothy seemed more cautious, while Marcus was visibly irritated by our arrival. "Gentlemen, Mr. Wheeler and I won't be joining you for dinner. With only 3 days left on the cruise, we felt it was important to advise you to be cautious," I continued. I noticed Andrew trying to suppress a chuckle, but I ignored it. Timothy appeared intrigued, while Marcus's discomfort grew more evident. It's worth noting that, each year, 222 people fall overboard on cruises and are never found, I added, letting the weight of the statement hang in the air. After a brief pause for emphasis, Andrew and I stood up and walked away. We could hear Timothy talking to Marcus as we left, but their words were too faint to make out. We headed to the sun deck for tacos and beer instead. The wind had picked up, so we stayed inside, but the sunset through the lounge windows was spectacular. "Well, Peter, that was something else," Andrew remarked with a grin. I'm not entirely sure what you were going for, but you certainly got their attention. I'm not sure either. Let's regroup tomorrow and figure out what to do next, I said, still feeling unsure. Unfortunately, things didn't go as expected. As planned, gentlemen, I am Mr. Sorensen. May I have a word with you? Andrew and I turned to face the tall, imposing Nordic crewman who had approached us, flanked by two silent crew members. I exchanged a glance with Andrew, and we both smiled before nodding in acknowledgement. Am I speaking to Mr. Jones and Mr. Moore, or Mr. Wheeler and Mr. Frank? Sorensen asked, his voice serious. Wheeler and Frank, I replied, deciding there was no point in hiding our identities anymore. Some passengers have reported that you threatened to throw them overboard. Can you explain these accusations? Sorensen asked, his tone formal. No, we didn't threaten them. We simply mentioned some statistics about maritime accidents and advised them to be careful. I clarified, standing my ground. It was a subtle threat, and you both know it. Sorensen countered, his eyes narrowing. Why would we do something like that? Andrew asked, feigning innocence. Sorensen gestured toward a quiet corner of the deck, and we followed him without a word. Gentlemen, did you threaten Mr. Richards and Mr. Manu? Sorensen asked, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more direct. Andrew and I exchanged a look and seemed to come to a silent agreement. Yes, I said finally. Though it wasn't phrased as a threat, our words were meant to carry that weight. Was there a particular reason for that implied threat? Sorensen pressed, now clearly serious. Absolutely, and you played a part in that reason, I replied, my voice steady. Sorensen's face suggested he was expecting a more detailed explanation. Mr. Sorensen, Nordic Cruise Lines arranged for these two men to share cabins with our wives for the week. Mr. Richards was with Mrs. Wheeler, and Mr. Manu shared a room with my wife. It seems Nordic Cruise Lines is hosting a cruise for married women looking to spend time with their lovers. While I understand that you are likely legally protected from such situations, this is deeply distressing for me, I explained, the frustration evident in my voice. Mr. Frank, I understand your frustration with your wife's actions, but surely you don't believe the cruise line endorses or supports such behavior. We pride ourselves on being a family-friendly company and are committed to maintaining that reputation. Sorensen responded, trying to defuse the situation. Andrew and I stayed silent, not offering further words. Though we had plenty to say, we chose to remain quiet. We leaned back in our chairs, exchanged knowing glances, and watched as Sorensen, though flustered, worked to keep control of the conversation. Sorensen's voice cut through the tension. I'm afraid we'll have to report this to the proper authorities. They may need to ask you some questions. Which authorities? I shot back. I thought you were the authority here, I challenged, my irritation creeping through. Mr. Frank, Mr. Wheeler, I must ask that you avoid any further encounters with Mr. Manu and Mr. Richards for the remainder of the cruise. Can you assure me there will be no more disruptions before we reach Miami? Sorensen's tone was sharp, his patience running thin. Andrew and I exchanged a look, then nodded, smiling in agreement. We didn't exactly promise, but it was clear Sorensen wanted to hear that. Once they left, we were alone in the room. The evening stretched ahead, but we had some business to attend to. We spent the next couple of hours crafting emails to media outlets, weaving in a bit more flair to the details, and attaching photos we knew were too controversial to ever be published. The morning came with a thick layer of quiet satisfaction. After a full breakfast, we noticed that Marcus and Timothy were nowhere to be found. The ship docked at Grand Cayman, and as we walked past their cabins, we saw the empty breakfast trays left outside their doors. Not long after, we spotted Timothy leaving with his luggage, bidding a quick farewell to the ship, leaving his maid behind without a second glance. Andrew and I decided to stretch our legs and explore the island, even though there wasn't much to see. But one thing stood out, swimming with manta rays. It was the only part of the trip that didn't have any underlying motive. We actually enjoyed it. That evening, we had another relaxing dinner, though Marcus was still absent. I briefly wondered if he had left after we did, but that idea quickly faded. Andrew had received over 30 email responses to the postcards we'd sent. Most were full of jokes and amusement, but some hit a nerve, calling our actions despicable and accusing us of going too far. We were pleased to see the message had spread as intended. Our friends and acquaintances found it hilarious, but our families weren't as entertained. Neither Amanda nor Laura had sent a response, which was odd. Since we were due to return home the next day, we made sure our phones were fully charged before heading to bed. We also sent out 32 press releases, despite having no real idea how to properly distribute them. Among them were 2 sent to Horizon Travel Company, the parent company of the Good Time Travel Agency franchise. We may have gone overboard by accusing Susan Raburn of organizing escapades for married women, but to be honest, we felt she deserved it. The story ended up splashed across newspapers and featured in TV exposé shows. Whether it would spark any meaningful response was still unclear, but at least it was out there. We felt satisfied with the outcome and fell asleep with a sense of finality. The following morning, we had breakfast on the Leo deck, savoring a last meal before departure. After finishing, Andrew turned on his phone, and I saw I had 1 missed call from my father. It was the first time either of us had checked in during the trip. "Dad, it's Peter. I saw you called. What's going on?" I asked, trying to sound calm. "Well, son, I assume you know more about this than I do. All I know is Amanda showed up on Wednesday, took the kids, and left. You told me not to let her take them, but I couldn't stop her. Later, I went into the house, but she was gone. The front door was unlocked, so I went in to check. Most of her clothes and the kids' clothes were gone. It looked like she left in a hurry. She didn't say where she was going, but I heard her mention Pine Hill Estate, which seemed to cheer up Lucas. Amanda's sister Julie lives in Evergreen Summit, so that's probably where she went. I'll try to get her number and give her a call," my father explained, clearly puzzled. "Dad, we got the postcard with the photos. Can you explain what's going on?" I asked, still processing everything. "Well, I think it's pretty obvious, son. Amanda went off on a cruise with some guy and left me to look after the kids while she spent time with him. What do you want me to do about it?" My father replied. "Dad, did you lock the house before you left?" I asked, focusing on practical matters. "Yes, I did," he confirmed. "That's all I could think of," I said, feeling an odd mix of disbelief and helplessness. Andrew and I hadn't planned to head home immediately, but the situation had shifted. I decided that Amanda should stay in the house with the kids, even though I had no idea why she had left. "What's your plan?" I asked Andrew, wondering if he had a better idea. "I'm not sure, but I think I'll catch up with you in a day or so. I'll keep you posted," he said, sounding uncertain. "Thanks for the call," I replied, ending the conversation. I poured myself a cup of coffee while Andrew was still on the phone. He didn't look happy. We had both assumed our wives would return home to take care of the kids, and we had planned to find somewhere to live for a few months while we sorted everything out. We were even considering looking for work in the Pensacola area. Andrew came back, looking disappointed, his face drawn. He grabbed a Danish from the buffet and sank into the lounge chair across from me. "Wow, you look thrilled," I commented, trying to keep the mood light. Andrew forced a tired smile and let out a deep sigh. "Peter, she's gone. Laura left and didn't take the kids. She left them with my sister," he said, shaking his head. "What? She left the kids behind? What did she say?" I asked, shocked. "Carla said Laura didn't say much. She thanked her for looking after the kids and spoke with the girls for a bit. Carla mentioned Laura's car was packed with clothes. I don't know how she found out I left the kids there, but she left alone." "What about the house?" I asked, trying to piece together the story. "Carla's husband said no one was there. All the furniture was still in place, but Laura was gone. He didn't go inside, but I assume all her clothes are gone," Andrew explained, his voice full of disbelief. "My situation didn't go as planned either. Amanda found out the boys were at my parents' place and took them from there. I think she went to her sister's in Evergreen Summit, but I'm not sure. She took all her clothes and the kids' clothes, too. My house is as empty as yours," I shared, trying to make sense of it all. We sat in silence for a while, both of us digesting the reality of the situation. Andrew met my eyes, concern etched across his face. "I know it's early, but I could really use a beer," he said quietly. We spent the rest of the cruise in the Leo Lounge, drinking more beer than usual. As the ship sailed on, we watched tired passengers heading home, their faces worn from the journey. Though Marcus was nowhere to be seen, the lounge was packed. The bartender, ever friendly, let us know the lounge was closing, so we made our way back to our stateroom. But when we arrived, we were shocked to find our things packed up and piled in the hallway. We were told that authorities were coming to deal with us because of our threatening behavior. We didn't quite understand what that meant, but no one ever came to escort us off the ship, and no authorities ever showed up. We'd been hoping for some kind of media coverage, but it didn't happen. Barry and I ended up in the last two seats of the airport limo van. The one-way tickets home were incredibly expensive, but we had no other option. We barely exchanged words during the flight. Everything had fallen apart, and we were both in a bit of a funk. Barry still had his kids, but his wife was gone. As for me, I was without both a wife and children. Going back to an empty house felt awful. There weren't any messages from Sheila, either at home or on our phones. When I called her office, I learned she no longer worked at International Casualty. I figured Greta, Clayton, and Calvin were all gone, too. The first day back, I spent cleaning the house and getting rid of Sheila's things. Barry was in a similar position, holding on to only the memories of Greta's brief visit to say goodbye to her daughters. We canceled our credit cards and put restrictions on our finances. Greta was an adult who could take care of herself, but Sheila had Todd and Jason, and I had to figure out how to help support them. It hurt that Sheila had taken them, but I knew she was their mother, and it was her responsibility to care for them. Greta didn't seem like she was willing to take on that responsibility. In some ways, it was probably better for the kids. Barry and his daughters settled into their new home, and things started to return to normal. Beth helped out with the girls while Barry worked and took care of household chores. As for me, my life had completely changed. I spent my evenings watching TV and eating microwave meals. I did some research and found out that Calvin Bostic had left town shortly after he was fired. Clayton had also lost his job, but no one seemed to know where he was working or living. I tried reaching out to Sheila's sister, Loretta, to get some information about the kids, but it didn't lead anywhere. Loretta told me that Sheila stayed with her for one night and then left without saying where she was going. I didn't fully believe her, but I had no choice but to take her word for it until I could find out more. Surprisingly, Barry and I started drifting apart. He still had his family while I had nothing. I tried to spend time with him and his daughters, but it always felt awkward. At the start of the new school year, I visited the boys' old school to make sure Todd and Jason's records were transferred properly. A helpful young woman told me the paperwork had been sent to North Shock Hill Elementary in Frackville 2 weeks ago. She seemed proud of this, so I thanked her. It didn't take long to track down Sheila's new cell phone number. I had to call her 3 times before she finally answered. Caller ID can be useful, but it's also easy to avoid someone. I kept the conversation short and asked her to meet me at the food court in Frackville Mall. I waited over half an hour for her to show up. This was our first contact since the cruise, and I didn't bring it up. By the time she sat down, my large coffee had gone cold. We didn't exchange pleasantries, so I decided to break the silence. "I want you and the boys to move back into the house," I said. Sheila shifted uncomfortably on the plastic chair, her hands empty since she hadn't gotten anything to drink. "All of us together?" she asked. "No, just you and the boys. I've got a small apartment nearby, but the house will be more familiar and comfortable for Todd and Jason. They can go back to their old school, and I'll be able to see them more often." "I can't afford to live in a house," she replied. "I'll cover the rent, utilities, food, and everything else. I'll also take care of the boys' clothing and school expenses," I offered. "What about me?" she asked. "Well, Sheila, you're an adult now. I believe you can handle things on your own. I'll need to focus on my work, and you can find a job that fits with the boys' school schedule, or you could work evenings so I can watch them. I'm sure you'll find something that works for you." She looked conflicted, unsure of what to make of the offer. Her gaze drifted around the mall, as if weighing the pros and cons of what I had said. All right, I'll do it for the boys. You're right, it'll be better for them. When should we start? She asked. I'll leave in a few days, and you can move in whenever you're ready. The decision was made quickly, faster than the time I'd spent waiting in that uncomfortable chair. We sat quietly for a moment. John, is there anything else you need to talk about? She asked. That was my cue to leave. I stood up, placing my empty cup on the table.
No.
As I walked away, I thought I saw a tear in her eye. When I looked back, she was still sitting there. The next 6 months passed without any major incidents. Sheila found a job that worked around the boys' school hours, and I had them on weekends. She took care of them during the week. Barry received divorce papers from Greta in Nevada, and his daughters were living with him, settling in well with help from his sister and mother. Work was going better than I expected, but to advance, I'd need to relocate. Given everything that had happened, I was hesitant to make the move. As Christmas neared, things took another turn. When I came back from lunch, Todd and Jason were already in my office. What's going on? Why aren't you at school? I asked. The furnace broke, so they sent us all home, Jason explained, looking down at his feet. When did you get here? I asked. We went home first, then decided to come here. The key was under the mat, Todd said. You could have come earlier, I noted, sensing their hesitation. They both kept their eyes on the floor, avoiding my gaze. What's wrong? What are you hiding? I pressed. Jason, speaking nervously, finally broke the silence. When we got home, Mom left her bedroom door open. She was in there with that man, Clayton. He was in the bedroom? I asked, needing clarification. Yeah, Dad. They were both naked. Doing what you see on the internet, Jason said, his voice quivering. I was speechless, trying to process the shock. How could I help them forget that image? Jason handed me his phone, showing the pictures. It didn't take long to confirm what they'd said. Todd added that Clayton had been there before, and that Sheila had told them not to tell me. She warned that if I got upset, we'd all have to move back to Frackville. After talking it over briefly, we decided the boys should move in with me. I gave them the apartment keys and sent them on their way. Then I headed to Human Resources. Minot, North Dakota, wasn't exactly a vacation destination, but there was an immediate job opening, and I was ready to take it. After sorting out the finances, I returned to the house. It was empty, probably because Sheila was at work. The unmade bed suggested she had been home for an afternoon nap. Just as I finished packing up the boys' things, Sheila walked in. John, what's going on? I thought we had an agreement. Where are you taking everything? She demanded. The agreement's off, Sheila. The boys and I are leaving. You can yell all you want, but it won't change anything, I said firmly. You can't take my boys, John. I won't let you, and the courts won't either, she protested. I'm taking them. If you want them back, go to court and explain everything, I replied calmly. What are you talking about? She asked, smirking as she put her hands on her hips. I placed the last bag down and faced her directly. What did you have for lunch today, Sheila? I asked. What does that matter? Why do you care? She shot back, still acting confident. Oh, by the way, the furnace at school broke today, I added casually. I don't understand, she said, confused. They sent the kids home during lunch because the furnace broke. I'll ask again. What did you have for lunch? I pressed, narrowing my questioning. Her confidence cracked, and she slumped onto the couch, silent. I picked up the last bag and paused at the door. Jason took some pictures. I hope Clayton has health insurance because he'll need it. I let him off easy last time, but now he'll face the consequences. She didn't cry or faint, just sat there like a zombie. I left without slamming the door. We bought a small trailer and were moved out by the end of the week. I passed by Clayton Mackey's house, but the owner said he left that day and didn't give me an address. I figured I'd deal with him later. Sheila did see a lawyer about custody, but she never contacted me. We settled into our new place, and the boys seemed happy. They never mentioned missing their mother. About 6 months later, I received divorce papers from Nevada. She didn't ask for anything, and I didn't offer anything. It always bothered me that she didn't fight for custody of the boys. I think about it often, but never bring it up. I believe the boys need a mother. Next week, I'll start looking for one, and Todd and Jason are on board to help.